We are hoping to give some time at the end of this session so that we can answer questions and have more conversations of what's going on either in your state or further conversations on also what we're presenting. So really grateful again. This is the last session of the day for Saturday, and we're going to be talking about how family-run organizations shift the school to prison pipeline. And Dawn and I are going to introduce ourselves. I do want to remind people that the chat box is at the bottom as well as the reactions. If you want to give us a reaction, we kind of know where you stand, if this is maybe a challenge in your state as well. And I will hand it over to Dawn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The agenda is who is PAL. PAL's located in Massachusetts from Waltham and out of the Worcester location. We connect to all systems regarding young adults and young children, mostly families. We have partnerships with many other organizations that support families as we do ourselves. We are statewide also. PAL has people from personal experience, lived experience, so we don't just talk it, we walk it also. And we have data to push the message to show what's going on in the communities and so forth.
So one of the things that we talk about at PAL is the family organization, Parent Professional Advocacy League, and we'll talk a little bit more. I've been connected with PAL for about 18 years. I'm the parent of 3 young adults and raising a grandson who's 2 years old. And what's important, I think, for Dawn and I to really let you know is that my middle son, got involved in the juvenile justice system when he was 11. And then my oldest son got involved when he was just about 13. And we'll talk about how we entered a little bit of that system as well. And one of my passions within what I do is really talking and teaching about the racial equity challenges, really calling myself out, but the components that come up with white privilege and really wanting to shift the message on what behaviors and how behaviors are looked at. So often Dawn and I, though we're both colleagues and we work side by side, our passions can be a little bit different or similar, but we bring messages in different ways. So I will hand it to Dawn.
Hi, so I worked with early education for about 10 years, working with smaller children and families. My son was introduced into juvenile justice at the age of 15. And I have a passion just to support families and listen to family stories and try to help as much as I can, which led me to PAL today. Yeah, I'm big on listening to families and just helping and getting the support that's needed.
So PAL is, and we often use this as our kind of introduction, most important thing is we're a statewide grassroots family-run organizations. The Federation is really kind of, we look at ourselves as kind of the sister affiliate, right, in Massachusetts. So many of you represent different states across the country as well. And we really work to promote families to become leaders. The best piece that we can do is get people to become those change agents, to be able to speak out and about their own families and be involved in systemic change. We also believe that family organizations, I know that a few people may have heard me speak with our executive director and our youth coordinator this morning. We really believe that messaging in a partnership with young people and with parents is also vital to making this shift as we talk about the school to prison pipeline. So JDAI, so this is an acronym for you to really know and understand, and this is how we as PAL kind of entered a system to shift things. So JDAI is a network of juvenile justice practitioners and other stakeholders that come together to work better. And this is kind of underneath, you will see kind of the the principles right now of what Massachusetts is working on, and the funding directly is connected to Annie E. Casey and the Philosophy Foundation. So PAL has been connected for over 10 years in Massachusetts, and it started really small. So for those of you that are either just beginning or having challenges with different systems, it really started in baby steps before we got to this next level. And part of what we did was really kind of infuse seasoned and knowledgeable people, which we'll talk about. One of the biggest pieces that we do is, as you see these 4 pieces, every year we try to focus on different things that are affecting our young people and within our state today. So one of the biggest pieces is we want to reduce detention rates of low risk youth offenders. So young people that are maybe making an impulsive decision and they end up getting in trouble. We want to be able to divert, and we have a lot of diversion programs. Those of you in other states probably have some of those as well. And there may not be enough diversion programs that you need, but this is really a priority in Massachusetts. We identify opportunities to reduce the length of stay, because we know that the longer the amount of time that a young person is in a detention center, the more they can have a recidivism or have a higher percentage to go to higher level adult incarceration. So we do all we can to shift that doesn't happen. And then we have been talking on a pretty long basis, years basis, on reducing racial and ethnic disparities. And then how do we do that? And what we really believe is we're replicating this in a local level. So if I was to look at Terry or Bonnie or Latoya that's here with us, right? It's going into the community itself to see what's working, because what's working in one part of the state in a city versus kind of another part of the state that's not happening, it can be very different. So it's very important for us to be able to shift that. So Dawn's going to tell you a little bit about the work that we specifically do within juvenile justice in Massachusetts as we've grown this trust.
So PAL sits on governance level policies. We're statewide. We have a statewide contract. We do family support one-on-one, which means we actually attend meetings and just give that family member our one-on-one attention. We try our best to make sure they get all their services and they're heard, and resources to the highest extent we can. We have a school behavioral clinic that we do too with parents, which includes IEPs, 504 plans, juvenile justice, if it's truancy or what have you. So we give tips. We have tip sheets to tell you how to present at a school hearing or even a court system, things to do and not to do.
So, and I will just add here, the most important thing I went into, if anybody was in the, I think Kimberly, I saw you in the grand families conversation that Glenda Claire had. And Renee, I see your heart as well. So thank you. What I want to mention is, and Glenda Claire had mentioned this in her presentation today. We believe that parents get paid to be within these situations. So it's a parent peer-to-peer model. So parents have lived experience of raising a child that has behavioral or mental health needs or emotional needs. Some of them do have connections with juvenile justice, and we look at juvenile justice broadly. If you have had a situation where you've had police involvement, a school resource officer, you are a child that has been brought into court because there's been a charge because of maybe poor social skills. Right now, we're seeing a huge uptick in social media, bullying within schools. We're seeing a huge component with that. If you've touched on any of those systems, in our mind, you're a family that has been touched by juvenile justice. It's not just you went to detention and you were a committed youth until you were 18. We really want to think about it as interrupting that that point of getting to a detention center, right? So all of those families that touch on it. So that's a big shift that we've had to educate many of our systems in our state to just say, like, we want to be on the prevention end. But if families have touched it, there's a danger to detention. There's a danger to prison, that prison pipeline. I also want to add, Dawn is one of the main staff that meet with families in the school behavioral clinics. And right now, what we've noticed is kids coming back after the pandemic, we are filling those slots quick. So though we don't identify as special education advocates, we're able to work with families to talk about what do you need so that your child doesn't get expelled, doesn't get suspended, and is able to stay in school. Because we know the risk is higher and greater if the child comes out of school with some of those behavioral needs. The trajectory is going to be even more difficult. But that really, I just want to really talk about, often people think that the one-on-one support isn't needed. It's a navigation that is needed across the board. So I would just echo, if you agree with that, love to hear more in the chat box if you'd like to jump in there. Some of the things that we've done at the local level is we have been part of what we call core meetings. Some states call them hub meetings. There seems to be like different terminology for different things. And what that is an interagency meeting. Dawn specifically sits on it, and other staff. And they meet with the family and they hear what's working and not working across systems. Dawn will then support the family to go into that meeting so that they're heard. The opportunity that we have in those meetings is sometimes lawyers or DAs or prosecutors attend. Is there a way to divert it so it's not an actual charge? So we've noticed that that has been a huge benefit, and our project specifically right now where we attend those meetings is located in Boston. I also want to tell you the steering committees that we have connected to JDAI, the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. That's another area that we sit on monthly in the community, 6 different meetings across the state, and we represent parent voice. We are saying and like knocking down doors and walls to constantly say what's working and not working. The other thing that we do is there is an initiative that we have to break down the school to prison pipeline. And there's some local initiatives, both in the education system, child welfare system, behavioral health system, and juvenile justice, where we're really working to shift the narrative of prevention and how we end up getting connected. The next thing that really comes up for us in our state is that we see a lot of young people that are in their homes and they are charged with domestic assault in their home, either to a sibling or to a parent. And that is their first step into the court system. So they've had an argument, maybe they broke something. It's not always that the police have filed, that the family has filed the charge. The police may come in, see something broken, and there's a next step. So part of our biggest challenge here is, and I kind of shout this out on the skylines often, a lot of the racial and ethnic disparities come up specifically in this as well. And it's not something that we see is necessary. So we've worked hard within PAL to get funding here and there to be able to support the diversion of those specific situations. Now, just imagine, and I think this is something that you may want to just receive data in your own state. The domestic assault charges in the home was not data that we typically received prior to a project that we worked on. But the amount of children that came into the courts with that was high, and over 60% of them were youth of color. So it was a big piece for us to be able to get the data and start having the conversations. The other thing that we had talked about is our CHINS, Child in Need of Service, actually changed to what we call child requiring assistance. PAL as a family organization is very involved in trying to change policies that aren't best for children. So this is one area that we were able to shift our chins to a child requiring assistance where guardianship wasn't challenged, where guardianship would be taken away. And it was supposed to actually put in that every school district had to have a plan so that if they wanted to pull a truancy charge on a child and bring a child to court, that there was supposed to be 5 to 6 different steps before they were able to do that. I will tell you, there's a lot of work to do in our state with that. For me to sit here and tell you that it's working great, it would not be accurate. We're seeing a lot of loopholes in that, and we're trying to figure out how to connect that. I also will tell you the biggest piece that we see for kids going into detention in our state is probation violation. We've done a lot of work on probation violations. So PAL sits on some committees with probation, and one of the most important things we do is when young people go into the court, we want less conditions than more conditions. So I often say, let's make smart conditions, not hold a young person so they can never do well. And that's really, really important in supporting young people and kind of interrupting what we're seeing with the school to prison pipeline. Dawn?
Yes, Meri took up most of some of the things I was going to say on how PAL sits on policy levels. So the good thing about when we sit on these levels, we get to bring back the voices from parents' personal experience, and these are people who actually care to listen and make change. And I often say, when we are in these positions and we sit at these tables and stuff, if you don't look at other youth and children as if they're your own, then we're in the wrong position. Like everybody, the thing I love about PAL is everybody deserves a second chance, and we all make mistakes and we learn from our mistakes. So I'm glad to be a part of PAL and be able to witness and say we do believe in second chances, and we don't believe that every child should be punished or anything. And I sit on the Juvenile Justice Pad, the JPAD, and I get to sit where voices of judges, probation officers, the commission of DYS, and many other people who sit there, and they really take the time out to listen to see how they can help and how can they change things in the communities, and how we're going to be better support for the children and youth in need of services. But I'm big on family, and PAL is too. Family means everything, even if it's a friend, aunt, uncle. It means a lot just to have somebody there to listen and support you going through these things. And again, we as PAL, we believe that people deserve a second chance, especially the youth.
So the other piece we had talked about, the governance level is really important. I'd love to I did put in the chat box, what committees are you sitting in right now where you see juvenile justice? We'd love to hear what you're seeing. We are co-chairing right now a summit for school to prison pipeline. So what that looks like is all agencies are actually sitting together, and we are coming up with a shared conversation and summit to look at data, to look at what is harmful, to talk about, I know I was in another session this morning and we were talking about brain development. It's really important to talk about brain development. So we've taken an initiative within Massachusetts that we have trained state police officers, judges, probation officers, prosecutors, DAs, all on the brain development of children and teens. And that took a large level task to get done. And it's not something that we don't need to repeat, but it's also something that has been really effective in stirring up that conversation. I do want to say at the governance level that we sit on with our juvenile justice state partners, we do have, like Dawn said, there's judges that sit with us, there's chief of police that sit with us, high level people within our public health department that oversee kind of the substance use components, really being strategic of who's sitting at that policy level is really important. But the challenge is, and I just urge you as you're thinking about what you're doing in your state, I know, Terry, you're here from Washington State, which is doing some great work out there. I know that Maine has been involved in some of the police work because we've shared projects back and forth. But another piece that I would just urge for you to really think about is when you get a parent seat, it is crucial to get 2 seats at a time. If you get a young person there as well, to be able to get multiple seats. So right now within the JPAD, there's 2 parent seats that the legislature have said needs to be held by parents. That's a huge plus for us. It's in many ways like it's a win, right? We've got to get the right parents there. Dawn is one of those parents that sits there. And we've got to be able to get people to be able to message. The other thing that we do is Dawn and I are connected to our juvenile justice where we do the racial and equity trainings. So we're having hard conversations, and I will tell you that we have done, and again, this is another way that we've interrupted kind of this pipeline. We have done racial equity trainings with insurance agencies, behavioral health, residentials, group homes. We've had conversations specifically with the after school programs. So it's kind of a, everybody's working together to make this shift, to make it better, which has been a positive. We also, and I'm mentioning this here, COIN, we sit on the COIN, and you can actually, I apologize, I didn't put the acronym in there. The COIN component that we do with the Department of Education, it's a collaborative and involvement committee, but it's an actual, it comes out of the University of Maryland, and there's federal dollars connected. And where we sit specifically with COIN is to figure out what's working and not working in the education system. So our message on like the behavioral health end, if I was to talk about mental health, is to talk about where do kids go and how are they identified in a crisis? What are they, how are they helped? What are the next steps that we're able to support? But on the juvenile justice end, I'm often talking about what are we doing with suspensions? What are we doing with the school resource officers? How are you dealing with a kid that, has some behaviors that are coming out that may have concern that you would need an assessment or evaluation? Because we don't want to get to a place where we're expelling preschoolers. And that may sound intense for people on this call, but it is a reality that happens, and we don't need to see that. And then the last thing we do is we do sit sometimes with the executive office for meetings to figure out what that next step is. So in these next 3 slides, I want to give you a heads up of what we've done, and this is more conversation. I would love to have people either put questions in the chat box or unmute as we go. The first thing we did is we had to create a strategic partnership. So we had to figure out who were our allies, who believed in a family organization, and who did we have for trust in the state. In that was a place that often we would take the step up and we would have more of a conversation. The second thing that we would do in the strategic partnership, there were some people that we were trying to get to our side to understand what we were voicing as concerns and what we thought, what the community was telling us that they needed. But many times we needed to be quiet and listen and just show up in order to gain the trust and strategically plan so that we could partner. So I do see, Phoebe, that you had mentioned in there that expulsion from preschool is happening in South Carolina. Appreciate you mentioning it. It is real, that's out there, and it's something we need to do. Renee, I know you mentioned also that understanding brain development is critical and crucial, and that's something that we were also, that we continue to do. Does anybody want to give us an example of what you've done in your own state to create kind of a strategic partnership to move the conversation in juvenile justice in your state or community? Terry, I'm going to call on you.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you repeat that for me one more time? Because I was typing in the message box
sure.
about the,
Can
the
you give an
challenges with.
example? I know Washington State has some great projects that you're doing. Can you give us an example of where you've created a strategic partnership to kind of move what you want to do in your state on juvenile justice?
Well, that's the thing. Right now, my job is I work with the WISE team. So my job is to go in with every parent and advocate to whatever their need is. I go in with the CHIN's petitions, with 504s and IEPs. And the biggest thing there is having a paper trail. But with the juvenile justice, I don't get to work as close with. That's why I'm in here, because it's something that is very much happening. I mean, preschoolers, kids in childcare facilities are getting kicked out because of behaviors. Parents can't go to work. They become unemployed, and that just makes the challenges in the home even more difficult.
So it sounds like you're in the court, but you're trying to figure out, if I'm correct, you're trying to figure out how to interrupt it before it gets to court. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And I think like the fact that you're in court, like that is a positive, right? There's work to be done before as well. Washington State, I don't know if you have this any longer, but one of the things that you all had that I was always envious of was a training piece that you were able to do directly in the courts, where you could actually teach families before they even said yes or no to different things in the courts. You had an actual training room. I think it went away after a few years or whatnot, but it was a definite way to be able to connect to families and give them information right there and then so that they were informed.
I haven't seen it with juvenile. I have seen it with adults. I know it comes on the PBS channel here. A lot of adults, and like, I apologize, I can't think of the name.
That's okay.
The basically, it's differing the court system. And I can't think of the name. I apologize. I have a TBI. So when I need to think of a name, it never comes up. But basically, it leaves the courts out of it. And what happens is the probation officers and law enforcement officials become more like care coordinators, social workers.
Yep.
If they're picked up for panhandling, the adults are okay, so you need money. If they're caught loitering or sleeping in the streets, that's a huge problem here. You need a place to live. How can we support you with that instead of throwing them in jail?
Right. Okay. That's important.
It hasn't gotten down to the juvenile level yet as to what I've seen.
All right, great. Thank you. Tina, I'd love to hear from you. It looks like you have a peer piece that you've done where youth and family are in the court. Do you want to unmute and tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, so in our community, we have a recovery court for adults that they can attend and have their charges forgiven if they participate and follow, the recommendations. A lot of times it's getting mental health services. And it's the same for the youth and family side. So we're there like when those court hearings happen and make ourselves available to meet with families and help them understand what their rights are and how to advocate for their children. This is interesting. We had one of the judges reach out to us and they wanted us to do a support group on site. They were going to mandate it to all the parents. And we were like, well, that's a little counterproductive to mandate someone going to a support group, first off. Second off, when you tell parents that those are the kind of things they need to do, you're telling them it's their fault. So so we advocated against it and we offered it on site and nobody wanted to come on site because guess what? Surprisingly, people don't really want to be in that building.
Right. And you make it really good. And Tina, what state are you from?
I'm in Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Okay. So thank you. I think that's another piece. We've actually heard the same thing. I mean, we had probation that would offer us space to do support groups or trainings within the police department. And the first thing that we said as a family organization, we really appreciate the space and the offer. But first of all, you're recorded when you go in, you're recorded when you sit in the support group, and how are you supposed to have confidential conversations, right? But I think that for many of us that work in this family peer and parent peer role, or even the young adults, if you're here as a young adult, we really know what works and doesn't work. So listening and having this honest relationship with both of us as shared allies is definitely a part of it. I do want to make a shout out also to Diane, who talked about restorative justice practices. I think that's a big piece. Thank you for mentioning that as well. Another piece that I noticed in the chat from Latasha is really the early identification of mental health and behavioral health. I would say that we agree so much with you on that as well. So this is kind of the second piece. So strategically, you've got to plan where your partnerships lie within the state, right? And there's two things, I just want to go back to that. There's two things to remember. You have to be strategic in the information of what you're teaching, but it's just important to be quiet and listen when you haven't formed the partnerships, because we need to gain that trust. When I think strategic, trust and engagement are right there with it. If you don't have trust, you're not going to be able to move your agenda. So really think about that as well as you're planning. The next piece is, who are you going to be able to influence? So this is something that we've done within PAL as well, is the right people at the right time listen to us. And not only do they listen to us, this isn't just Meri or Dawn or Lisa going in, it's a group of parents, right? We have data, we have surveys, we have anecdote information or vignettes on what families are saying to us are working and not working. And when Dawn goes into that meeting, like she had said, to really shift criminal justice reform, she's not bringing just the story of what's going on for her family and the impact. She's bringing all the other stories of the families that she's talked to. She's bringing my story. She's bringing other people within the community, the grandmother that may not be able to be there to testify, but she's bringing it to the table to influence people of what is working or not working. I really like our Youth Move chapter and Youth Move National. Many of you may have seen, and we talk about talking about what helps and what harms. And we also look at the influence of what's going to work and not work. So I applaud people that have been able to get school resource officers out of your school statewide. I know that that's something that's not going to come statewide directly for Massachusetts. So who are we able to influence to make small baby steps to be able to get that to shift? And right now, kind of the schools and the school resource officers and how to keep young people safe, but also there's a lot of young people after the pandemic that are having, I would love to see reactions for this from other states. We have a lot of young people that have never had behavioral health needs that are starting to have behavioral health needs after what has happened to us in the pandemic. And if you agree with that, I'd love to see either a thumbs up or a heart to show that you're going through what we're going through in Massachusetts. So the influence piece is just as important. The next skill that and when we talk about these skills, it takes time to teach parents or parent leaders. So as you're building your organizations, I know Bonnie, you're on here and you're really trying to get your foot in the door in Georgia. I appreciate that. Getting the right people to be able to gain the skills is very important, and it can happen, but it takes time. The third thing that we do, and thank you, Teresa, we definitely agree with building the relationship is a big piece to be able to do that. The third thing we do is we do advocate. And people think sometimes that's a dirty word, but it really isn't. We let the system know when it doesn't work. We let the system know when it harms our families and it harms our young people. And right now, any parent that says to me they want their child to get the next step, and they're considering filing a CRA or going to court, I say you cannot take the trauma back of what happens at detention. So in our detention centers, you have handcuffs, you have shackles, and you are strip searched. And that is traumatizing. So we have worked really hard to raise our age in Massachusetts, where now if you have an offense that is a criminal offense, we can actually have young people in different facilities up until the age of 21. That's been a priority for us in Massachusetts. We would like it to go the amount of years of school, but that's something that we haven't geared towards yet. And I just want to go back to something that Bonnie had said, and I believe maybe Deborah, that we'd love for it to go as high as brain development, but we don't know that we're going to get that. So advocacy skills and being really strategic is important. So the next piece that I'm going to talk about is what's defined kind of within the work that we do as, and I hate this terminology, but it's important for me to tell you about it, is crossover youth. So the definition of crossover youth is for a young person that is connected to both child welfare and juvenile justice. This is a national term that's also used. So it's something that if you haven't heard it, you might want to keep it close to you, look in your state of what they're doing with it. So I'm going to go through a little bit of data points with you, and then Dawn's going to give you an example of a family that she has supported in CORE that had both involvements. So the child welfare and juvenile justice system, again, the crossover youth is what it's called. About 40% of our juvenile justice detention population has had an open child welfare case. 72% of youth committed were involved with DCF either prior or during their commitment. The most, I think, hard point and percentage for me always to say is in many times, those youth have had their first contact with child welfare by 5 years old, and nearly 40% of those young people by the age of 3. So what happened from age 3 to age 11 that we didn't interrupt this, right? That's where we're looking as a family organization to say, what has been lost? Some of the pieces that we hear from families, they've asked for support within the schools, and the schools haven't offered an evaluation. They didn't realize that they should ask for an evaluation. That's one. Number 2, they had trusted an individual that they thought could help them with maybe a challenge or a trauma that was happening, and that landed them with losing their child because of a 51A. And we're not debating neglect and abuse, but we're saying, why did it go from here at maybe 5 years old all of a sudden to 11 years old? And then the other piece that we really are concerned about in our state specifically as well is the girls that are experiencing this and the young people of color. So for girls, 40% experienced more than 6 placements with child welfare, and 15% had 11 or more. One young man had 37 different placements over his lifetime prior to getting to the juvenile justice system. So we want to really look at what is working and not working. And I'm going to go back to what is helpful and what is harmful for young people so that they can do well. So if our goal is to interrupt that school to prison pipeline, we have to look at this data to see what are we not doing well by a 3-year-old that at 11 or 12, they come into the system. And that's something that is shared work. It's not, but we want to be at the table. So PAL is constantly talking about, and we're asking questions so that we can advocate for some of the most vulnerable families and children that haven't received that support from the beginning. So Dawn, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can explain a family that you've supported that had multi-agency involvement and how difficult it was to support them.
Yes, I'm thinking of one family right now, the back and forth, like you said, it's the school prison to pipeline, right? Because it starts in the school for most families with a kid misbehaving, and then the CRA's in line, which the CRA gets DCF involved, kind of, right? And then from DCF, the kid might run away or not show up to court dates, what have you, and then get juvenile justice involved. And I don't know. It's sad. It's unfortunate because the kid is lost between two systems because they're not helping that kid to stay on the right track, like you mentioned before, Mary. I often say if I could have my own program, it would be ran a little like juvenile justice, like Job Corps. I'm sorry, like Job Corps. Why? Because they get to leave with a certificate, education, and a training, and they wouldn't be caught in between systems, unfortunately. But it's hard because most parents don't know their right to DCF, and they don't know their rights to juvenile justice because it's shared custody in most part, it's joint. So um,
So the other thing that
agencies,
go ahead.
sorry, agencies like PAL and other agencies step in to help support that family to let them know their rights and let them know what they're obligated to and what's supposed to happen and what's not supposed to happen, because all it takes is for a family to be uneducated and not know what are they doing wrong in the system or where's the system supposed to direct them.
The other thing that I wanted to add, and would love to see reactions again for this, part of what we see often is two systems colliding and who is going to pay for that child to get the next level of support. So often it is us as advocates that are going in not to look at the funding stream of who's going to pay, but what are the next step resources that are going to connect. And that often is a piece that is really hard for us to look at and to understand, but it's definitely a clear piece that gets in the way. So the racial and ethnic disparities in juvenile justice work, I would love to say that it's getting better. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that it's getting worse. While youth of color make up roughly 33% of the youth population in Massachusetts, this is what we're seeing and what was noted in 2019. One of the things that I want to let you know is, I don't know if this happens in other states, our data is behind. So it's very hard sometimes to get accurate data. It takes us like a year after to get data. So right now in Massachusetts, just under 40% of the young people, these youth that are identified of youth of color, 40% of those are arrested. 60% of those are typically arraigned. 66% of the young people of color that are in our Massachusetts system have basically been detained for pre-trial, awaiting trial, or they have had a probation violation. And when they've had a probation violation, I have to say, it's not that they have committed another crime. It could be that they didn't come home on time. They didn't show to school, right? There's something that has gotten in the way, but yet they've now been pulled in. The other thing that we have noticed is that with COVID, many of our courts were closed. So young people that are waiting for pre-trial, their time in detention is longer. So we have had even more of a reason to kind of like speed things up. And I'm sure many of you are seeing this across the board in other states. But our concern is that we're keeping young people there because of this time issue, right? To be able to get into court. And 68% of those young people are now committed, which means that they're going to be in a locked facility until they're at least 18, if not longer, if there's a situation of trial that's not there. These disparities have only increased over time, and the fairness that required the system increasingly under threat. So I just want to make a shout out again, like this is a challenge, and we need to kind of, anything we can do as shared states, but also within your state to think of what these young people are going through is definitely a piece that's here. So why is it important to know your state's data points? And I just want to throw this out, and I put down a resource for you as well that's called Reforming Juvenile Justice, a Developmental Approach. So data allows, and this is what we use often within our state. We've done two things, and I'm going to show you one, but we do have a report I put in the chat box. PAL did a report on justice-involved families. You can go to our website. Dawn will put the website in the chat box, www.ppal.net. We did a survey with families to see what they needed and what they understood. Many of the families said they had never met another parent like them, though they knew there were school issues, there were different pieces that were there. So we ended up actually doing a survey, and you can read all of the results in the report that we have. The other thing that we were able to do is we recently did another survey, and we asked families what has worked and not worked in young people. And we're gearing up to do some more survey and kind of pop-up opportunities for families to give us information. So knowing your date, knowing the data in your state is important. So I can only talk to you about what we've done in Massachusetts, but I'm available to connect with all of you from the states. I urge all of us to kind of join forces if there's ever a way possible. I know there was conversations with leaders last night on juvenile justice. Kathy Wright is a great person in New Jersey that has done some great work. Many people on this call have done great work. Data allows system leaders to see disparities, and data that's not there is really important to ask for. So I'll give you an example. I think I was, PAL itself, many of us were a broken record when we asked, well, where is the data on families that are brown and Black? Where is the data on youth that identify as LGBTQ? You know, where is that data, right? Because people aren't thinking about kind of what we're thinking about and the impact. The other thing that was really eye-opening for us in Massachusetts, we heard from systems that they often guessed the ethnicity or race of individuals. They didn't ask the question. So we pushed back and said, like, that can't happen. You can't sit there and guess if we want accurate information, but it was something that had come up. Where did they occur? What's going on? The different pieces that are there is really important. And to identify and evaluate policies or practices that may inadvertently drive children deeper into the system. So one of the main pieces in our state that we have continued to hammer on the table is probation violations. We can go from one part of our state where a child gets brought into court and they have 3 conditions to follow. You can go to the district 5 towns over and a young person has 32 conditions to follow. And it's all determined within the court and the probation departments that are connected. And we've done a lot of work to shift both the narrative and I would say teaching people why that is not helpful. But side by side, we've done a ton of research within Massachusetts. So we've got risk assessment tools now. We've got different interview questions that are happening. Positive youth development is another piece that we've done within Massachusetts. So we've pushed the question and we've received some great programming that come from it, but it's also the same question that we've answered. And I often, one of the things that I will just keep in mind to tell you as well, is one of the things that came up for us is there were family members that showed up for meetings and were quiet and listened for about 8 to 10 weeks before they told people that they were parents and parent advocates, so that we had a trusted place at the table. So we consistently showed up. And I know it sounds like bizarre. We should be able to get a pass like everybody else, but often parents of kids in juvenile justice and child welfare are criticized, right? Like we don't show up. I often say we were both diverse. I mean, and we had a diversity within our leaders. So we had people that were bilingual. We had people that identified as LGBTQ, grandparents, single parents, show up at meetings, which was also really important for us to do. So this is a kind of a piece of an infographic that's available, and it will be in the PowerPoint after for anybody to be able to see as well. Part of the, you know, though I look at this photo and I often put it in when I'm teaching professionals, not so much for families, because I feel like as parents, sometimes we get it, but the minor infractions that come sometimes in suspensions or expulsions or behaviors that are happening at school get us to this next step. 69% of the young people that are in schools, they've not had violent crimes. We've talked about the money of where it's going. There are many states that build new detention centers. I will tell you, we've had to stop that. We've had to have conversations about that. What does that look like? What are we doing to kind of shift funds? So it's really important to recognize that if you start advocating and how you advocate, there may be a place where costs get shifted, and you've got to watch that as well. The next one I really like, because this is kind of today's student experience. And some of the pieces that I just throw out to you to really think about and consider as you want to interrupt this happening is to think about what you have in your state. Are there out of school suspensions? What does the data show for expulsions? Do your schools have zero tolerance policies for behaviors for children? That's going to be a huge challenge. Do they transfer students to alternative schools so that the children that they identify or that districts identify as behavioral problems all go to one area? Really looking at, and I'm reading from the harsh school disciplines, those are things to really be aware of. Another piece is to think about, are there armed guards, school resource officers? Do your local polices also connect? Do they go to the school? What do they do? What type of program do they do? There was one school district, this was several years ago, that a police officer would go and do a kind of scared straight conversation with young people at a school, and the parents didn't know. They thought that it was like, get to know your community officer. But what they didn't know is that they were identified as being the behavior problems within the school, right? So really being aware, like, what are the programs about and what are those next steps? So this data also shows that over 70% of students involved in school-related arrests or referred to law enforcement are Hispanic or African American. 70%. And also I want to keep in mind that youth of color, LGBTQ students, and students with disabilities are often punished more often and more harshly than their peers for having the same misbehavior. So again, as parents, we use the individualized education plan or a 504 plan and evaluations to identify our kids that have disabilities. But I often go to, there's a function to every behavior for every kid. But when your kid is identified as having a disability, what are the safeguards that your child's not going to go to that next step? Dawn, I don't know if you want to add anything here that you see in the community.
No, I agree. I feel like the school system itself is just losing patience with families and children, like, especially after the pandemic and what we're going through. I just feel like overall the school system itself is losing patience. Schools used to be a safe haven for families and kids, that's what they used to go to and depend on. And now it's the total opposite. It's like the schools want the children and families out.
Well, and right now, I think with the pandemic, we're seeing a huge challenge. Latasha, you have your hand raised. Do you want to take yourself off mute? I hope I pronounced your name right. If I didn't, please correct me.
Okay, I'll help you with that. It's no problem. It's Lataisa. The Y is pronounced like a long I, so it's Lataisa.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak or chime in here, and thank you both for hosting this. This is amazing. So I wanted to just say that some people are not aware that there are identical codes. So there are educational codes, but then there are identical sister codes in the penal system. And so when kids get disciplinary notices or there are actions that are violations of ed code, you need to be careful about those penal codes, because it's like a direct shot into that resource officer then being able to reach out, and they get like a kid could be charged with like harassment or what is it? Touching somebody, right?
Yep.
And then there's a code in the penal system. And I had a family one time that had these 3 different educational code violations, but they were up in question and they did get removed. But the next day, the police were at their home wanting to speak with them and wanted to speak specifically with their son. And I was like, under no circumstances will we do that. And the school had given the child an administrative transfer to a school that I knew was profoundly racist. And I said, do not let them do it. Let them give the administrative transfer. Let them even do the school referral, but you just want that administrative transfer, but do not send him to that school. That same day, the police went to the school looking for their son. So just be careful about that. And there are also codes.
That's a great point. And I think that that's a great point and a great point to get the information within each district about the codes and who you can trust so that you know that. I'm going to add that to my next, topic conversation, because I think there's so many things that many of us are just picking up because of either oops or you have a trusted person that knows those. So I really, really want to make a shout out and thank you for mentioning that. It's definitely something we're going to look into as well. Bonnie, I'm going to come over to you in 1 minute. I just want to make a shout out here. So some of the things, and this is also going to be in the WUVO app as well. You'll see the presentation and some of these things. There's some great videos. Justice for Families does some great work nationally. We're connected to them. There's also some pieces that talk about, again, promoting the brain development and the different connections. The challenge of failing to collect data and what that works. And again, that's a great place to have conversations with legislative people if you're trying to do some criminal justice reform in your states. These are a few of the samples, again, that are free on our website. We were able to write a tip sheet on what to do if your child gets in trouble with the law. We teach our kids to trust the police. We teach our kids to talk to the police, right, as community members. When they turn 12, we tell them not to say anything. We tell them not to do anything. And what I really learned also as a parent, and, you know, just want to make a shout out as well. I understand, you know, there's the proceedings right now regarding the RB case of what's being looked at. And one of the biggest challenges also that I just want to mention is what I had to teach my kids as a white mom for white kids is very different what a brown or black person needs to train their kids when it comes to police. And I often talk as that white person in the state, and I'm going to say, make people uncomfortable because I talk about white privilege and what it is. But I also stand with the parents where when they go out and they're teaching their kids, you know, to have their hands in their pockets, to not touch things in the stores. My kids didn't have to go through that at 3 to 5. And there's a big difference of the experience of what families are going through. So it's something that we really do shout out and mention. So there's an infographic, like I had mentioned. There's some pieces. We've just noticed that anxiety and school avoidance is a really big piece. So how do we protect our kids? And also, I just want to say, as far as school systems too, there's a lot of great teachers out there doing amazing work, and they often feel like they're the champion that's doing it to try to make the shift, but there's nobody behind them. So how do we also, again, strategic partnership, who are your allies in your state to do the next step? Bonnie, I am going to come over to you. We've got about 5 minutes left and would love to answer a few questions or thoughts. Bonnie?
I also mentioned this in the chat because this is something that I ran into specifically with my son, having been in the child welfare system. Once he was returned to me and child welfare closed out their system, all of the resources that we were getting help from, as far as helping to teach him to self-regulate and things like that, literally dried up. And my child welfare worker was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. You'll have to find services on your own. The hardest part for me with that is there's such a disconnect in the services between the time that child welfare closes out their case and the time the parents are able to find another provider, that during that time, I've seen a lot of the kids end up in the juvenile justice system because they're not getting the help that they need, because once child welfare closes out their case, that's it. They're done. The help is gone.
Right. You know, that is a big piece that we're talking about in this crossover youth, is when you get the pieces that are there. And this is a piece that we're having also. You shouldn't have to bring your child to court to get a Medicaid insurance or an after school program. I mean, this is the conversation we're having, right? You shouldn't have to do that. I don't even want to talk about residential, because residential is a whole other piece, but I think just to be able to get the supports, Bonnie, you make a great point, and it's something that we're often challenged with, to be able to do some different pieces within our state. The other piece that I will mention here, we've got something in our state, different resource centers across the state, and I know that you know, Teresa is on here that supports kind of our behavioral health model in Massachusetts. We've got some other people that are here that do different things. You have to be a seasoned parent to be able to navigate these different systems, right? The juvenile justice system is nothing like our child welfare system. It is nothing like our mental health system. So to be a parent that has interagency involvement, and I've been that parent, Dawn's been that parent, it takes a different level of savviness to navigate. So as you're building your staff or thinking about your staff training as well, really think about, how do you gain all of those different skills to be able to build, to make that change? Because we've noticed it's great to have experience, but it's also really necessary to have this higher level seasoned person that can navigate all systems. I'm fortunate and lucky to have a brain that keeps a lot in after the 20 years that I've worked in it, but I'm still stumped, right? With what does that word mean? What does that connection mean? Which has been tough. So I do want to end on time. I know you guys, everyone has done an amazing, amazing day, and totally agree. It takes a village, Teresa. And also I would make a shout out to what you had said, Bonnie. It really is difficult, and health insurance is a whole nother situation. Any last questions before we close for the afternoon? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat box.
Hi, I just wanted to add, this is Teresa McIntyre. I just wanted to add that I think these conversations, we have to keep having these conversations and keep pushing forward. This was really great to come together today. This is my first time attending the conference, and it was so great to get all this information. But I definitely think the conversation has to keep moving. And Meri, as you mentioned, you know, who are our supports? Who do we have in place? Who can we go to and work together as a team? This is a team effort. I just wanted to say really quick, I remember when I was struggling with my daughter and I didn't have the support in place. And it's like, once I got that support in place, I didn't want to just stop there, because I knew there were so many other families that did not have that support. And I think that's what happens too, is that we can't stop even when we are, maybe, because it's always something. But when we know this information, we have to share it and keep sharing it. And that's one of the things I just want to commend PAL for doing, is always being there and helping families that advocate for their children. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. And it takes a level of partnership, and it also is, again, I want to say, I think many of us, right, we want what's better than sometimes. Also, I know for my oldest son, I wanted better from what I wasn't able to give him, right? Like, I didn't want families to go through what I went through. So I think it's also that piece of, you know, did you drink the juice of advocacy, and you're not going to give up now because you want to change the world? And you also want people to have a different level of not just fairness, but informed of real life changing decisions, rather than the rights taken away from you. So Lisa, I want to come over to you for the last question or comment.
Yeah, I just have a thank you for the space.
Sure.
I have drank the juvenile justice juice. It's one of my passions. But I have a question for you. I have a family in mind that I'm thinking about.
Sure.
Are your services in Massachusetts free? Like what you're offering, is it a free service or do they go in through insurance? Those
So
kind of things.
that's a great point. So the one thing that PAL does is we are free to families. We get back to families within 24 to 48 hours. And we have, I will say, at least I don't know where you land as far as either with a family organization or other provider organizations. It's been very important for us, and I would give the kudos over to shared brainstorming with our executive director. Diversified funding is very important. So we have state funds, but I think what Teresa's also alluding to is that PAL is an organization that's able to advocate because of diverse funding. So that's a big piece. Like there's no dollars, right, that can be state connected, federally connected to that. We've got some different pieces. So that's a huge, huge plus that we're able to do. And then the other thing that I would say is that we do have bilingual staff and bicultural staff, and we've got relationships because we also believe that families deserve to be culturally comfortable with who they feel and they identify to work with. So that's another component that we've been able to do. Really appreciate all of your support. I wish you well. Lisa and others, our contact information is in the chat box. Please get in touch with us if you want to have more conversations. We can do anything on Zoom now. So we can have huddles to brainstorm juvenile justice, and we don't have to wait until next year for the Federation. We could always continue our collaboration and connections together and then meet up in Oklahoma City next year. So on behalf of PAL and all the families that you support, thank you for the work that you do, not just for your kid, but the many children out there. Have a safe and great afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I wish I had my music. I'm not a very good singer, Dawn.